Basic Brewing Radio is sponsored in part by the American Homebrewers Association. Want to get discounts on homebrew supplies and save money at craft breweries? Join the American Homebrewers Association and save at more than 2,300 AHA member deal locations worldwide and online. Members enjoy discounts on pints, food, and merch, and 10 to 30% off online orders. Visit homebrewersassociation.org/basicbrewing to check out the AHA member deals in your area and join the AHA. That's homebrewersassociation.org/basicbrewing, homebrewersassociation.org/basicbrewing to join the American Homebrewers Association to access thousands of members-only discounts. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 17th, St. Paddy's Day. I'm James Spencer here at Basic Brewing Radio. We're all about home brewing. This week, Matt Giovanisci of Brew Cabin and I get a little philosophical on the topic of recipe development as we follow Matt's process of bringing a beer from abstract concept to beer in the glass. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, and if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our Brewers Logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing. Find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. Thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. I have some great news from my own homebrew front. You may remember my Christmas kettle sour beer that I soured with Imperial Lacto Brevis and then pitched with Imperial House. Well, I apparently went a little overboard with the souring because regular Saccharomyces, including the additional packets of dry yeast that I pitched in there, essentially had little effect on lowering the gravity of that wort. I tried adding nutrients and oxygen. That didn't do anything. Finally, after getting advice from Alex Gruber of Imperial's technical support, I pitched Imperial's Suburban Brett, Brettanomyces. That was a couple months ago. Well, I decided to leave it alone for a while, and yesterday I took a gravity reading, and I'm down to 1006. That's 1.006 specific gravity. And even better news, the beer tastes great. It had a little powdery, Brett pellicle on the top of it, little bubbles, look like something out of, the Milk the Funk group. Nicely tart, with a subtle background sweetness and a Brett funk that reminds me of an Orval that's been around for a little while. I'm very excited. I think I'm gonna bottle this one and lay it down for a while. It's much more interesting beer than if I had not pitched the Brett, I think. So I'm actually happy that the beer turned out the way it did and was kind of a pain in the rear for a little while. Many thanks to Casey and Alex at our friends and sponsors Imperial Organic Yeast for sticking with me and being so helpful and patient in giving me suggestions on what to do to rescue that beer. Top-notch technical advice and support is only one reason to choose Imperial Organic Yeast. Now, this sour wort was more tricky than normal worts, but usually I like to say my stir plate is dusty because I don't use it anymore to make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches. And when I pitch an easy open Imperial packet of 200 billion cells in an early afternoon, my airlocks are usually bubbling before bedtime. And that was hardly ever the case with the liquid yeast I used to use. Ask your local homebrew store about Imperial Organic Yeast and check them out at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. More good news from the homebrew front. My toasted rye Doppelbock, inspired by my conversation a few weeks ago with Mika Leitonen, is on tap and so good. At 7.4% ABV, it's deceptively drinkable. For that beer, I followed Mika's advice and toasted a pound of milled malted grain in my oven to add even more flavor to this beer. The beer had Pilsner malt, untoasted rye, as well as the toasted rye, melanoidin, and midnight wheat for a little bit of color. It's based on Mika's Ryenator recipe that you can find on brewingnordic.com. Just search for his article called Brewing with Rye. And, of course, I tweaked the recipe just a little bit. The beer finished at 10:15, but it doesn't taste like it. It doesn't, it's not like gloppy, or it doesn't have, as substantial a mouthfeel as 1015 makes it sound. I did a beta glucan rest, and that really chewed up any gloppiness from the rye. Can't wait to share that with Steve on a future Basic Brewing video episode. And maybe my Christmas sour will be ready to sample then as well. On the commercial beer front, I got a sample pack from our friends at Tavour. I'm very excited about it. I also heard somebody on YouTube pronounce it Taver. Could it be that I've been saying it wrong this whole time? Well, however you pronounce it, Tavour, that's T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, is a way that you can get delicious craft beer from all over the country sent to your house. It's not a Beer of the Month club. You choose the beers that you want on the Tavour app. It's a free download, and there's no obligation to buy anything. Ella at Tavour sent me recently a wide variety of beers. There's double IPAs from Equilibrium Brewing and Anchorage Brewing, a coffee stout from Wild Leap, and big, fun, fruity beers from 903 Brewers, The Brewing Project with a K, and McKellar Brewing. This month on Tavour, Ella says to be on the lookout for stouts from Four Hands Brewing and Cycle Brewing, and IPAs from the likes of Turning Point, Toppling Goliath, and Tripping Animals. Why don't you check it out? It doesn't cost anything to sign up, and there's no obligation to purchase anything. In fact, if I can ask you a favor, go to Tavour.com or Taver.com, T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, or download the app, and when you sign up, enter the promo code Basic Brewing, all one word, and you'll get $10 off your first shipment of $25 or more. And it's free to sign up, and there's no obligation to purchase. Sign up at Tavour.com, D-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, or with the Tavour app and enter Basic Brewing as the promo code. Taver. Or Tavour. I like Tavour better. Sounds more fancy. Okay, let's talk to Matt Giovanisci of the Brew Cabin YouTube channel and brewcabin.com to talk about going from story to glass. Matt Giovanisci, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me again.
You're taking part with Chris Colby and me on this series on recipe development. And we've been talking so far with Chris more of kind of the nuts and bolts of the recipes. So what I want to do now is kind of step back and go from one side of the brain to the other and talk about more inspiration rather than arithmetic. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I want to keep people interested in the series and kind of, if you just talk about nuts and bolts all the time, it's like going to school and
yeah. Who likes school?
Well, the people that got the good grades.
Yeah,
so,
some of them.
So what I want to talk to you about is kind of going from story to glass and how you take some creative ideas, and you're a very creative fellow.
Thank you.
But how do you take creative ideas about what a fun beer would be like and get them to the paper and then to the fermenter? So let's talk about some of your background in recipe development. Mm-hmm. Did you start off in brewing being comfortable in making your own recipes and figuring what that stuff was all about?
No, absolutely not. I was a kit boy. So I'm buying kits from the local homebrew store online. I basically did kits for a long time because they were just, the recipes were already there. All the ingredients came with it. Extract kits, even all grain kits as well. So no, I was actually very nervous to get into my own recipes.
So what was it that flipped the switch in your brain on, kind of figuring out, well, that's not so hard? Or was it hard?
It was a lot of reading. I've read a lot of books on brewing, and even before I was developing recipes, sometimes when I wasn't even brewing, I was still reading brewing books for fun, because it's just something I enjoy learning about at all times, and even to this day. For me, it was having multiple kits under my belt, and then being like, okay, I'm making good beer now. These kits are coming out good. And then I moved into smash beers, right? So the single hop, single malt beers. And that was really where it started. It was like, I'm going to get, a bag of two-row. I'm going to get one hop that I really enjoy, whether it's Cascade or Centennial or Citra or one of the C words, and brew a beer like that and see how good it comes out, right? And really the big help, I think, for me was software. I really enjoy like computer tools. I'm on the computer all day. It's my day job. And so I like the idea of having some sort of software or app that I can use to help me develop recipes. And obviously throughout the years, there's been a bunch, the big one being Beersmith, but I was on a Mac. I've been on a Mac forever. And the tool that I used in the very beginning was called Beer Tools. I don't use it anymore, but it was really kind of a simplified version of Beersmith. And having that and seeing the interface and it looking easy to me, because it was a more friendly interface than I think Beersmith. Beersmith was intimidating to look at as a just somebody who aesthetically. It looked, how like sometimes you look at a spreadsheet and your eyes kind of glaze over because it's just so many numbers and it looks very complicated. Or if you look at code, it just looks complicated
every single time.
Yeah, and
for me,
yeah, and that was what Beersmith looked like all the screenshots, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure this out. And so when I saw Beer Tools, I'm like, oh, this looks like a friendlier sort of more user-friendly app. And so that, I think, compared with Smash Beers and doing that was like, okay, I can try this. And then obviously reading.
I still have my yellow legal pads that I started, developing recipes with.
Yeah.
After reading, and in the first show we talked about this, Designing Great Beers and Radical Brewing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two books that I recommend. But, scratching out on paper was how I kind of started out. And I tried to get into the software side of things. I do use certain calculators to calculate IBUs and specific things like that. But it's still, I'm, using my brewer's logbooks to scratch on paper the recipes. So, but that's just my style. But you mentioned a couple of things that I want to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
You brewed kits and got your technique down so that you were actually brewing good beer consistently.
Yeah.
And then you started doing smash beers where you could actually taste single ingredients and how they affect the beers. And so you started basic with those recipes so that you could get, it wasn't like Mulligan Stew where you throw everything in the cabinet in there and then you get a beer that you don't quite like, but it's okay, but you don't know what's wrong.
Right.
So I think that those are two very important things, very important aspects to get under your belt, maybe before you start, jumping off into advanced recipe development.
I 100% think so. Yeah. I was doing basic brewing.
Lowercase.
No TM.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting simple. And that's what I like about these, these sampler shows that Steve and I have been doing.
I love those.
We come up. Oh, thank you. We come up with recipes that are simple, but we get to taste the ingredients, and then sometimes I remember what we tasted.
Yep.
And then, I've incorporated that knowledge into, larger recipes. And I have to
even listening to it from my end, I'm doing the same thing. If you guys do a malt or even a hop that even I like the descriptors and you guys like the beer, I'm like, all right, that's going in the arsenal.
And I have to put out a plug for your Brew Cabin YouTube channel and your blog as well. It's brewcabin.com, right?
Correct.
So you not only have blog articles and videos for free. You also have curriculum that you also have that's available for a fee as well. If people want to get into more advanced brewing techniques and such as that. So
right.
So you are confident enough with your recipe development skills to actually teach other people how to do it.
Yeah, I think because if you watch the one video that I did with you on the YouTube channel, there's no lie in that. I took 3 years on one recipe trying to, and I have every single recipe still and every variable that I changed. And sometimes I would do one variable at a time between batches. Sometimes I would just, sort of start over. And I know when you're doing A/B testing, especially in the computer world, you're supposed to only test one variable. I sometimes like to tear everything down and start completely fresh and then compare those two, because sometimes the results are greater or worse, or at least at a larger margin. So I that beer that I know that you even had you took a little bit and did an episode where you brewed a beer that was similar using Kveik yeast, right?
Right.
And I like that recipe still. I'm still tweaking it, but I'm now that it's like set in stone, I've broken it off into variations now. So I'm kind of going forward with it. And so, yeah, it was really sort of understanding not only the process, because the process does matter in the recipe development, but also the ingredients, trying different even brands of even the simplest base malts, different hops, obviously, different yeast, and then how much yeast to pitch and how little maybe to pitch sometimes. So it was just it was a lot of trial and error until I thought, okay, I really do have something here. And I've brewed beers that were bad, where I would brew it because I tried something crazy and I'm like, all right, that was a mistake. And I've never in that series of those beers specifically, I didn't dump any of them, but there were a lot where I was like struggling to get through them. And then others that I'm like, okay, this is good. We're getting through it, but it's not what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. You got to brew a bunch to get your legs under you, so to speak. And the same thing with cooking. In the past couple of years, I've cooked a lot. And so I've gotten to go from basic recipes that I'd find online, and then I've made them a couple, 3 times, and then I've started to make them my own and to add different things in there. So it's the same thing with brewing. If you don't brew a lot, you don't develop that kind of muscle memory.
Right. And speaking of cooking too, I consider myself a little amateur cook. I've been cooking my entire life. I enjoy I can safely say that I have mastered eggs, because I have made eggs and I want to say, I don't know if it's my favorite food. I eat it. I've been eating eggs every single day since I was probably like 6. And I've cooked eggs every single way you could possibly cook eggs multiple times. And even in the kitchen, I'm constantly learning new techniques still to this day. Like I've done, for example, like scrambled eggs. I make scrambled eggs almost every single day. And I just learned a new technique not 3 months ago where I've never heard before, where you take potato starch or cornstarch and you make a slurry with it, and you use that in the scrambled egg. So I'm like, okay, let's see how that goes multiple times and compare it to ways that I've done it before. So I think it's kind of also weirdly baked into my DNA of wanting to perfect a single thing. Although, with my recipes, I don't have a lot of variety in style. I don't have a beer in every single style category that is perfect. I have 2 or 3 at this point, because it takes me so long to like get it right, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, I think that's one flaw in my brewing style is I hop around a lot.
And no pun intended.
Yes, so to speak. It's not a – never mind. I was going to try to outpun you, but I'm not going to do that. But because I brew for this show and because I brew for the
Yeah.
video podcast, I got to brew different stuff all the time.
Yep.
If I can't brew the same, cream ale every month.
Right. Yeah, that's why I only do videos once every 6 months, it seems like.
So let's talk about some examples that you've sent me.
Mm-hmm.
How and so we can kind of track how you go from this kind of creative idea of, fun idea of what a fun beer would be, and go from, the abstract into the glass, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So talk about your Twin Peaks beer.
Right. So a lot of my beers start off with their names first. So I have a running list of beer name ideas that I keep on Apple Notes. And anytime I hear something that is just, it has a ring to it, or if I'm watching TV, which I do a lot of, and I just hear something, I go, oh, that would make a good beer name, right? So I just write them all down. Also, I have my select styles that I prefer as a beer drinker, So Black IPA is a beer style that when it came out, or Cascadian Dark Ale, when it came out, I was absolutely in love with it because it combined two of like my favorite things in the world, right? And New England IPA is fairly new. I'm a big Pilsner fan. I'm a big Kolsch fan. So I like really, really light, simple beers. I like dark beers, and I like hoppy beers, right? Which is pretty much, I think it runs the gamut. But when I watch Twin Peaks, it's probably, I don't know, it's in the top 5 favorite shows of all time. And a lot of my beers come from TV because I just happen to watch a lot of it. It's sort of TV and movies. And so I wanted to make, and again, going back to that IPA that I took 3 years to develop, the same goes with these, where it's like, I want to create a beer that's, I don't want to say, I'm hesitant to use the word perfect, but I'm using big air quotes here because to me, it's like I'm brewing the best version that I think for that style, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Twin Peaks idea was, there's a saying in the show, season 2, the owls are not what they seem. And so I'm like, all right, that's a cool name for a beer. And so I had that idea, and I'm like, well, how do I take the essence of Twin Peaks, this show, and turn it into, put it in the glass? And I think Black IPA fit because 1, it's just dark. 2, if you want hoppiness, there's a lot of talk about it takes place in the Pacific Northwest, which is where hops are grown here in America. Mm-hmm. And they talk a lot about the Douglas firs in the first season. And so I thought, okay, you want sort of like a piney, dark, this sort of balance between light and dark in a way. And so I thought Black IPA would be a perfect fit for that. And that's sort of where it started. And then it was a matter of, okay, we have the basic idea. Now we have to go into researching the exact ingredients that would go into building a beer like that.
I think of sitting at the diner with coffee and cherry pie.
Exactly.
Twin Peaks.
Yep. So the damn fine coffee, black coffee, is definitely a part of the recipe development. So it's when you want that darkness, right? I didn't want a lot of chocolate. I wanted more coffee notes. And then I thought, well, is this going to work? Because dark bitter coffee, does that work with piney, resinous, bitter hops? So I feel like you have to make room for that. You can't create, in my head, when I was sort of sitting there planning this all out, you can't create a beer that has the bitter astringency taste in your, on your palate that comes from the malt, the dark malts. So you can't have that. You can only have it from one or the other, right? And really, in my head, I thought, all right, well, I can minimize hop bitterness, right, in the way that you would a New England IPA, but that I feel like wouldn't make it good to true to style. I think it needs to be bitter I think the Black IPA needs to be bitter from the hops, not from the malt, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is pretty simple, stuff when it comes to Black IPA. But I chose, I think in my recipe originally, because it's changed over the years, it started with chocolate malt, pale chocolate malt, because I learned that pale chocolate malt actually has coffee notes, not necessarily chocolate notes, right? So I thought, okay, let's use pale chocolate, and then I want it to be dark, and pale chocolate's not going to get me there, but a de-bittered or de-husked, maybe midnight wheat or Carafa 3 or something that was dark, but not necessarily adding to the roastiness of the beer.
Right.
I wanted to use something like that. Then I learned, thanks to Michael Dawson in his book Mash Maker, which is a great resource for just general recipes. Well, not general recipes, his recipes, but they're good recipes. The first recipe in that book actually is a black IPA, and he talks about the idea of cold steeping versus adding it to the mash. And I know about cold steeping I make cold brew coffee all the time. So I'm like, oh, right, cold brew coffee, not as bitter. You can take actually a really bitter coffee that maybe isn't good as a hot coffee, and if you cold brew it, a lot of that bitterness and that harshness goes away, so you can still enjoy it. So any coffees that we get as gifts, around the holidays, where they're just a little roasty, we'll say, I'll just make that into
charred.
Charred, yeah.
That cost a few bucks.
Yeah, so that I'll make cold brew with that, and so that's exactly how I do the black IPA is cold steeping those grains, and then using just a base churro.
Our friends and sponsors Desiree and Dave from High Gravity and Pippin's Taproom got some exciting news this week. They took 5 medals and an honorable mention at this year's Oklahoma Craft Beer Awards. So congratulations, that's amazing. Among those are gold for Center of the Universe IPA, gold for Legend of El Dorado New England IPA, bronze for G6 Belgian Strong Ale, and honorable mention for Black Cat's Eye IPA, Black IPA. And you know what all those have in common? You can find kits for them at highgravitybrew.com. One of the benefits of having a homebrew shop and a tap room is that you can develop award-winning beers like these by serving them to the public, testing them out, and then turning them into homebrew ingredient kits that you can ship across the country. You can't forget the Warthog electric systems at highgravitybrew.com. They can take the pain out of propane, whether it's 5 gallons up to 2 barrels, a brew-in-a-bag setup like mine or Steve's, or a 2 or 3 vessel setup. Use the code EBC75BB, that's EBC75BB, to save $75 off your Warthog electric purchase. And while you're there, you can pick up an award-winning beer kit at highgravitybrew.com. That's family-owned and operated, highgravitybrew.com. So you could also, in theory, I have my own little coffee roaster. You can roast coffee to different levels of darkness.
Right.
So that you can get different flavors out of the beans. And, there's so many different beans. I've had a coffee beer, I think it was at Bentonville Brewing way back in the day, where they worked with a local roaster to get a coffee that actually had a fruity flavor in the beer. You would swear there was fruit in the beer.
Yeah.
So you're just opening the door to coffee. It opens up a whole new set of tracks that you can go down.
Well, exactly. So for me, I wanted to start with a base beer, like a base black IPA. I can brew it over and over again every time, crowd pleaser, and then have variations on that, obviously playing on the coffee themes within Twin Peaks and using, it gets expensive, but fruity coffees, I like, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly or not, but African unwashed, naturally processed coffees, because that cherry of the actual fruit and the seeds that are within, they let that sit out, sun dry, and all that juice kind of soaks into the seed or bean, and then they, the reason they light roast it is so that you don't lose a lot of that fruit character. And so, unfortunately, coffees like that are more expensive because there's just a lot more work that goes into processing them. But to me, they taste the absolute best. And so if you want to mix that, you want to add in, the Double R Diner black coffee and cherry pie mixture, that could be a route to go. And that's exactly what I've thought is like, can we, without adding actual cherry preserves, maybe we just use a coffee that's got a little bit more fruit to it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as how to add that, I think cold brewing is still the best way. Although I'm not sure what would happen if you took a fruity coffee and cold brewed it. You might lose some of that fruit, or it may accentuate it. So I'd have to test, whether adding hot coffee would work better than adding cold coffee, better than just cracking the beans and sticking them in the fermenter, in a mesh bag and letting it sort of steep, basically cold brew it within the beer, because that could give a whole different flavor.
So let's talk about the grain bill.
Yeah.
When I first got into brewing, one of the switches that turned on some of the lights in my brain was, every beer is mostly base malt.
Yep. Yeah, that's helpful.
Even wheat beers are not mostly wheat generally.
Right.
So most beers are a base malt.
Mm-hmm.
So you said two-row. Did you just want to have in two-row? Forgive us Americans.
Yep.
American pale malt,
Yep.
which is fairly neutral. Did you want to choose that for your base malt because it was neutral?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the pine notes, from the hops is what I was really trying to do. It's like, can you get coffee notes and can you get pine notes and do those, work together? And not have any sort of malty notes, meaning mouthfeel. That was actually a decision I had to make too, was did I want this beer to have mouthfeel?
Mm.
And so, when you talk about doing any sort of stout or even like a New England IPA or something like that, you have you could add wheat and you can add different adjuncts, oats, flaked barley, things like that. I personally didn't want mouthfeel because I felt black coffee doesn't really have that much mouthfeel.
Mm.
So I wanted to stick it. I wanted to be more, I don't want to say thin, but have a thinner body, a thinner mouthfeel. So I went with two-row. On hand, I keep Pilsner malt, I keep pale two-row from RAR, and I keep Maris Otter on as my base malt. Those are my three base malts. So I just went with two-row for this one because, again, I'm more focused on the hop and I guess roasted malt profiles.
And the Pilsner malt you would probably choose for a cleaner beer with not a whole lot of other flavors involved, maybe.
Yeah.
And then the Maris Otter you would want more kind of a biscuity or a toasty, kind of base. Is that your thinking?
Exactly. And you know what? You say Pilsner, and I'm like, if I did a black IPL version, maybe I'd use a Pilsner malt.
So what percentage is the base malt, and how do you figure out how much to add to get to the target original gravity that you want to start with?
This is where the software comes in, right? This is where it's super helpful for me. I used to I tried very hard for 2 years to get into full metric, right? Being an American citizen, I just found it incredibly difficult to wrap my brain around it. And even like I tried to even do in Celsius. I just couldn't. I guess for my day-to-day life, I just understand what an ounce of hops is, and I understand what a pound of grain is, and I had a really hard time, I had a really hard time seeing 3.36 kg and going like, I can't even imagine the volume of it. I don't even know what that is. So I used to, when I was doing metric, I used to develop everything based on percentages, right? So I would start with the percentages, or I would start with the finishing or the target OG and then work backwards. Because at that point, I didn't really care about the how many kgs were in the beer. But right now, I'm back to good old imperial system, and I'm using 12 pounds of pale malt, which is about 88 to 89 to 90%, pale, so base malt. And that gives me, an OG of, where are we at? 1067.
And this is a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch.
Yep. So I wanted it to stay, and I'll usually base it on how much alcohol I want. I didn't want it to be a session black IPA. I didn't want it to be a double imperial black IPA. So I'm kind of I tend to lean on the high side. So I went with 6.6.
And what else goes into the mash tun?
So nothing. That's it. That's the only thing that goes in the mash tun. So it's a very simple beer from that perspective. Everything else, the other malts go into a cold steep, a 24-hour cold steep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I use 1 pound of chocolate malt and 8 ounces of Carafa 3. I've also substituted Carafa 3 with Midnight Wheat and saw no difference.
Mm-hmm.
But the chocolate malt I think is super important because I think it gives it that coffee background. So those two I crush, and then I put them in a muslin bag, and I put them I have a little mini 2-gallon plastic fermenter bucket, and I put the bag in there with some RO water, and I just let it sit and steep for 24 to 48 hours. And then I add that at the last 10 minutes of the boil.
Oh, wow.
So that's when it gets added. So I'm really, I'm trying my hardest to not impart any bitterness from those malts. I want all the bitterness to come from the hops.
So it's just sanitizing that steeping liquid, basically.
Yep.
And are you concerned at all about any unconverted starches or any sugars that haven't been fully developed in that steeping process, since there's no enzymes in there? Or
I mean, I guess because they're roasted high enough, I'm not are we going to get any? I don't think so.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I just get all of my sugar from the 2-row.
But there's no I'm skipping ahead, but there's no like residual sweetness or starchiness in the final product.
No. It's a dry beer.
So, any other adjuncts?
That's it. That's the only thing for the base. Now, as far as adjuncts, I've done coffee before in different stages. I still don't think I found the coffee that I want. I do have versions. So because of Twin Peaks, right, we have the coffee, we have donuts that are a theme, we have cherry pie that's a theme. So all of these, I could add cherry preserves and graham crackers to get a cherry pie flavor to it. We have the Log Lady, so I thought we could do an oak version of it, which I don't know any commercials examples of black IPA that's been barrel aged, but that would be really fun to do, I think. So there's all these different variations, but I was mostly concerned with getting the base right, and then from there, sky's the limit, right? It's the same thing with the Bowie and Space recipe, my New England IPA recipe. It's like I can do, now that I have a base, it's like, okay, let's milkshake-ize it. let's throw some passion fruit in there. Let's do all these variations based on the base recipe.
You could do a tincture with cherries to add the cherry pie kind of aspect as well.
That would probably be the way to do it, right? So that way you're not adding any additional fermentation with the cherry fruit. That would be a good idea.
Just don't use frozen dark sweet cherries.
That didn't work. That didn't work out.
No, you haven't heard the show. You haven't heard this week's show.
Not yet.
It worked all right with the passion fruit beer that we did on the video episode, but for some reason in that hoppy beer, it didn't work.
Yeah, I saw the passion fruit one. In fact, I did a Goza using the Oregon mango puree.
Oh,
doing the same technique that you did with you did a pineapple pale,
right,
a while back, yeah,
and putting the fruit in the keg.
Yep, putting the fruit in the keg, yeah.
So they come out all right.
Yeah, that one came out okay. I had a little bit of an issue with head retention though.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know if it was the Goza or just because it's a sour beer, or if it was the mango. I'm not sure. But that was the only time I ever had that happen. So. So then I've done other ones. I've done another one. I did a passion fruit wit beer.
Oh.
That came out excellent. That's what I use. I use both. I use the same technique for both, but the passion fruit wit beer was awesome.
Yeah, the passion fruit. At least I did the passion fruit in the fermenter, and it really it cut down on the fruity sweetness, I'm sure, but the tartness and just baseline fruit character was really good.
Yeah.
But we're off the track a little bit, but that's okay. We're learning.
Yeah. Yes.
So this big dark beer is it's a Cascadian dark ale or a black IPA. So you got to think about hops.
Yep.
And that's one thing that we haven't talked about in the series yet, in breaking down the nuts and bolts of. Mm-hmm. But how did you? There's so many choices out there. What resources did you use to figure out what hops are out there that would give you the character that you wanted?
I don't remember the exact resources, but I do know that I went with Chinook, Centennial, and Simcoe. Those were the three I went with. I was gonna use Cascade because it's Cascadian dark ale. I figured that would be where to go with that. But then knowing that Centennial is super Cascade, I thought, well, in order to get more pine and just more of those piney notes, I went with Centennial. Chinook I'm using, and I don't know. I'm sure I just went online. I just Googled, which hops are going to give me the most pine, basically. And I know Simcoe, I've either through interviews or something, but I heard Vinny Chilurzo of Russian River, he uses Simcoe in Pliny the Elder. And so I thought, all right, there's got to be some pine in that, right? Because that's a pretty piney beer. And so I think I heard an interview or read an interview, and I was like, okay, yeah, that seems like the way to go. And then when I looked up Simcoe, it's like, yeah, it's got a lot of pine elements to it. So what I do in this one is I add just a half ounce of Chinook at 60 minutes to just give me a baseline bitterness. And then the rest of it all, I do 6 ounces, 2 ounces of Centennial, 2 ounces of Chinook, and 2 ounces of Simcoe, all doing a hop stand, flame out, basically. I don't drop the degrees. I still want that bitterness to come through. So I keep it, here in Colorado, I think my temperature to boil is like 203 degrees instead of 212.
Yeah.
So when I shut off the heat, it's pretty much at 200 degrees. So I have a hop stand for 15 minutes, 6 ounces of hops, and I just let it sit there for that long, and that's it. That's all the hops. I thought about dry hopping, but I actually really liked the hop profile when it came out, and so I didn't dry hop. And I have plans on doing a version of trying dry hopping, but for now I'm just like, this actually worked out really well. So I was a little worried that dry hopping may add too much fruit notes, like aroma notes.
Yeah.
So I wanted that pine, and I just kind of thought and I summarized acid would give me more. I mean, I'm just guessing, but that would give me more of a pine aroma note, more than just like cold steeping a hop, basically.
Something fun is coming soon from our friends and sponsors Ricky and Kelly from Groenfell and Havoc Meaderies in Vermont. Ricky the mead maker says they're going to launch a series of tea meads, starting with a collaboration with their friends at Run Amok Maple. That's all he's telling me right now. He's teasing me with the information about the tea meads. Groenfell and Havoc are always coming out with fun and delicious honey-based beverages. Most are practically sessionable and fairly low in ABV, at least for meads, like Root of All Evil, a delicious spicy ginger mead, and there's the Ancient collection as well that's much higher in ABV and inspired by traditional meads of the past. And now tea-based meads are coming. Those will be fun in the summertime. You should probably follow Groenfell and Havoc on social media to get all the tasty details when they come out. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Check them out and get craft meads delivered to you across the country at family-owned and operated Groenfell.com. That's Groennfell.
Now, if I were getting started in recipe development nowadays, this is the area that would kind of confuse me the most, because adding all those hops post-boil, you can't necessarily depend on the IBU calculators. You can't necessarily depend on the software to give you an adequate prediction of what your bitterness is going to be, because you can switch between them and they'll give you crazy different numbers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't rely on that number at all. It's just through, honestly, a lot of this came from me brewing the New England IPA and trying different hops at different timings to know that, like, wow, when I add these hops at 200 degrees, so I don't drop it to 180 before I do a cold or a hop stand, I just found those beers to be really bitter. You know, so for me, I kind of nowadays, you know, back in the day, it would be, you know, 60 minutes for your bittering edition, or I always do first wort hopping. I don't actually, you know, just because, you know, if it has a benefit, great. If it doesn't, whatever. It's the same thing to me.
It's easy.
You're right. It's easier. You know, helps prevent boilovers, maybe. But basically, you know, you have your 60, 30, 15, you know, flame out editions, right? And you have, like, what do they say? 60 minutes is bittering, 30 minutes is flavor, you know, anything towards the end is aroma. And I just found that, actually, even Scott Janish's book, The New IPA, was very helpful in this, where I pretty much now, all of my beers are either 60-minute editions or flame out editions.
Yeah.
You know? And I just don't, it never really made sense to me. Like, what's the 30-minute do? That does flavor?
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, and a lot of people are doing 30-minute boils now, or short boils. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, so I figure if you really want bitterness, you got to boil the hops. And I know this also because I tried to make hop water. So that's what I'm drinking now is hop water. A commercial example, but hop water was really interesting because I thought maybe if you heat the hops, you know, you do a hot steep, right? Versus just dry hopping, you make two completely different products. I mean, and you would imagine one is undrinkable and one is delicious. And the delicious one is the dry hopped one, the one that's basically hops in cold water. I tried to heat hops, the same amount of hops that I used 4 ounces in a 5-gallon keg in 170 degrees of water, Fahrenheit, for 15 minutes. And it was absolutely bitter and disgusting, and it never got better. So in my head, I'm like, all right, if you want bitterness, I mean, it may not be as bitter as a 60-minute edition, but it's still bitter even at a Whirlpool, or even a flame out. So I just figured I didn't want too much bitterness in the black IPA because, again, we have chocolate malt and we have these coffee notes, and I didn't want to clash with that. And I also didn't want it to just be a super bitter beer. I like a sort of lightly bittered, but a lot of hop aroma. And so that's why I made that decision. But yes, you cannot base your calculations off the software and the IBUs. It just doesn't, you just can't. I think it's just honestly trial and error. I mean, you have your bitterness. I basically look at it like, okay, you have your bitterness in the beginning. That's going to give you your base IBU. And then anything after that, just, I guess, maybe cut it in half or maybe by 3/4, and you might get somewhere close. But yeah.
When I first did my 15-minute pale ale recipe way back, probably 2005.
Yeah.
It was an extract beer that I only boiled for 15 minutes, but I put twice because I'd read in Ray Daniels' book that if you boil for 15 minutes, you'll get like half of the IBU utilization, you know, the isomerization rate as a 60-minute boil, but you'll get the flavor, more of the flavor from the hops. So I said, and at that time I was talking to like Bob Hansen from Breeze, who told me that you don't have to boil malt extract for an entire hour.
So I put those two together, and I said, I'll only boil this wort for 15 minutes, add twice as many hops at the beginning of that 15-minute boil, and I'll get a beer with the amount of bitterness as a 60-minute boil, but with increased flavor.
Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
And, people thought I was crazy, and I, probably am, but but the beer was good.
Yeah.
So yeah, the hop question is probably the trickiest, because you can do formulas. If you add this much base malt, you can predict your starting gravity. You can predict your OG. You can predict the color. If you put the ingredients in the percentages in your brewing software, you can predict the color.
Doesn't. The only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't account for boil time and rigorousness. So it won't. But I don't see that adding that much color over time.
Yeah, that's tricky. It's tricky. And then water chemistry. I'm going to have you on at a later date to talk more about your philosophy and technique of water chemistry.
Yes.
But how did the water chemistry enter into this recipe as well?
I just did a base balanced profile. So I start with RO water. It's just a little bit of calcium chloride, salt, Epsom salt, gypsum, pretty balanced. I didn't want, again, wasn't trying to go for something that was accentuating bitterness, wasn't going for something that accentuated the maltiness. I kind of wanted a balance between, the light and the dark, if you will, to reference Twin Peaks. So that was all kind of, it's weird. I feel like a lot of even the number decisions that I make, or a lot of the just some weird decisions, sometimes just either fall in line with the original inspiration, or I will match it to the original inspiration, right? So if there was like a special number in Twin Peaks that I could reference, that would have probably have been the ABV, right? So anything that like that, it's just, kind of using those little pieces to kind of build a story. And then when you drink it, it's like, here's why I chose to balance, these things. And here's why I chose to, these hops, and here's why I chose these, it's all those, they all go into the original idea.
I'm sure there's numbers in Twin Peaks, like a room, a room number, or no, that's The Shining.
That's The Shining, 237, right? Yeah.
And then you can't forget the yeast.
Yep, that one again. I used Imperial House, any sort of Chico strain. Again, not trying to mess with the esters. I just wanted a clean profile again to accentuate the roast and the hops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this instance, the yeast is sort of one of the easier things.
Yeah, it takes the back seat. Yeah, for sure.
He just wanted to stay out of the way, do its job, and stay out of the way.
Yeah.
Well, that's. I mean, so how did you hit it the first iteration? Did you say, "Yep, that's what I was envisioning"?
The first iteration was really good, and I almost thought, I'm not going to change this. And that rarely happens for me. I also think too, the reason it happened that way is because at least here, there are so few black IPA commercial examples that I can use as research to compare to, that I'm like, any black IPA is welcomed in my home. So and if I hit it well, I'm like, great, now I can start to make variations. I've tried variations with roasted barley over chocolate malt, which I didn't like as much. I've tried, again, like the first hit was good, and then later hits, I'm like, I tried something different. There's another, I noticed that no matter which type of like color addition I add, whether it's, Carafa 3, Carafa 2, Midnight Wheat, I think I've done another one, Perla malt, I think I did. None of those seem to have made a difference on the actual flavor of the beer, but definitely the chocolate malt I think was the best one. And there was another one. I didn't do Black Patent. No way. I wouldn't have done that because I didn't want that ashy roastiness, even if it was cold steeped. I've always cold steeped. I thought that just is the best way. And I've tried different hops, mostly sticking with those three, but I've done variations where I took Chinook out and just went Centennial Simcoe. And I think that that's okay. That would have been, that I think that turned out okay. But I don't, the one hop I'm not willing to compromise on is Simcoe. I think that is absolutely the winner hop for this beer. I could probably, and as far as IBUs, like I could try Cascade over Centennial, but then of course I'm adding twice as much Cascade, and I might be getting some vegetal notes that I don't want, so I'm going to stick with Centennial as well. So I think Chinook's the one I could kind of like forego on the next batch if I wanted to.
You might do some testing with Black Patent, because Black Patent gets a bad rap.
It does. You're right. Especially cold steeped. It may be excellent.
Yeah, it's a lot less ashy than people assume it is. That word gets tossed around, but then we've done some experiments with it, and it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, and
in defense of Black Patent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm willing to again. I kind of feel like just in life and in business and in brewing, the answer is I don't know. Let's try it, right? I don't know. Let's try it. I'm willing to try anything. I love being wrong, because if you're wrong, then you're willing to learn.
So we've spent the whole show talking about this one beer instead of but I think it's great. I mean, it's a nice deep dive, and it kind of it does follow the theme of the show of going from the abstract into the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
But say, what's your troubleshooting? I mean, when you want to try another version, I mean, the scientists would say only change one variable to figure out, what its effect would be.
Yeah.
Because if you change a bunch of variables in an experiment, you're going to get a bunch of wild cards. You don't know, and if something changes, you won't know what to pin it on. So is that your approach, or do you tweak multiple things at once?
I tweak multiple things, if I'm being honest. and the reason for that, or at least the reason I give myself, is I like making big changes, because then you can see big results, and you might hit it. And it's not as scientific. It's not, because I think otherwise it's like, all right, I made this beer. Let's switch out just one malt this time. It's like kind of a snooze fest, right? Because the beer that comes out may not be different at all, right? If I switch out Carafa 3 with Midnight Wheat, I might get no effect whatsoever. And I'm like, okay, well, that didn't push me forward at all. I get another great beer, but it didn't push me forward. So I might, try to do, say, a different darkening. Maybe I wouldn't even do that. I would do, like I did, roasted barley over chocolate malt, and it's to me a big change. But maybe I mess with, okay, let's add some more chloride to this beer as well. Let's make it unbalanced in the water profile. Let's lean more towards the roasted malt side as opposed to the hop side, and see what that gets us. So it might do a couple of, and at the same time I might add dry hops to that. I don't know. So it's, to me, I feel like making the bigger, swathier changes, if that's a word, you get a better sense of like, okay, you went too far. What can you dial back? And again, I kind of like taking the risk and hitting something that's like, whoa, that's wildly different, and that was a good stab in the dark. For the most part.
One disadvantage of this hobby is it takes time.
Right.
And there may be, a month between your different versions, and it's kind of like, well, I got to wait another month to do that one little tweak.
Again, that's why, writing all this down and having software to tell, to let you know, and to take thorough notes as you're tasting too is crazy important.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fun, and I knew it was going to be.
That's good.
You're a good. Apparently, you're a good brewer. I haven't tasted your beer, but I've seen it, and it looks good.
It looks good.
But you're good. But you see, you know what you're talking about, and you know how to say it, and so that makes my job a lot easier. So all I got to do is ask a stupid question, and then you turn it into a good answer. So
it makes me feel good. Thank you.
So check out Matt's Brew Cabin channel on YouTube and brewcabin.com. on the internets.
Mm-hmm.
And for more fun stuff and useful stuff, more importantly. But I appreciate your taking part in this journey on talking about recipe development, because I think it's one of the funner parts of the hobby.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Matt. I'm looking forward to getting together with him again to talk water chemistry and how he sort of simplifies it. I need that. It's intimidating to me still. Be sure to check out his fun videos on the Brew Cabin YouTube channel and his blogs and curriculum at brewcabin.com. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. So until next time, until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voice, and we'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.